Today I'd like to show you how to machine knit a stitch combination that I really love. The inspiration was a hand knit shawl, something like this. This is my machine knitted version, and it is not a copy or translation of the hand knitted one. I've used my normal technique of figuring out how the machine can use its strengths to produce something visually similar to the one that I admired. As I speak, I'm scrolling through several uses that I've come up with for this wonderful stitch, and because it's a lot to remember, I've placed a free downloadable article on my website. It contains versions for all gauges of machine. Most versions use a ribber, but a single bed version is included. The shawl is now in my Winsome Wraps book, and it's made with a luxury yarn, Mary Maxim Natural Alpaca Tweed. But you need not invest a fortune to learn this stitch. Knitter's favorite cowl and scoody pattern in the Special Scoodies book utilizes Red Heart Super Saver yarn. To work the design, we use the ribber, so you definitely need some weight on the fabric. Here you're looking at the hem of the cowl before I started knitting the knitter's favorite fabric. I've used some comb weights that I already have and that I enjoy using. If you would prefer or don't have weights such as mine, you would definitely want to begin in waste yarn, run in a row of ravel cord, and then hang your ribber, comb, and ribber weights in the waste yarn. The center of the fabric consists of 6 stitches that will form the cable. They stay on the main bed at all times, and they knit every row. Smaller cables near the edges of the fabric are also all knit stitches and also knit every row. The lace design is created with needles out of work to either side of a ribber stitch that tucks on alternate rows. The cables are made to be more prominent by means of ribber stitches that also tuck every other row. Tucking every other row is creating half fisherman's rib, or it would be if more needles were in work. So we use half fisherman's rib settings. Here is the demonstration of them from the Brother Manual, and here is the same kind of setup as described in the manuals for the Silver Reed family. In Silver Reed, Singer, Studio, and so on manuals, the stitch is normally referred to as English rib, but it is the same stitch. I'm showing you the settings that I used for using Red Heart Super Saver on my Brother 260. You will need to fool around with the exact relationship between the stitch sizes on the 2 carriages based on your particular machine and the yarn you're using. Here are the needle setups that I use for various machines. The bulky needle setup is showing all of the needles that I used. That is all of the needles involved in the knitter's favorite stitch combination. There may be more total needles in the project. The standard gauge versions have more needles in work. Although we're doing basically the same thing, some needles are tucking every other row, and some needles are knitting every row on the main bed and will be cabled, and some needles may be out of work. There's one standard gauge version that I mostly use, an alternate one on the bottom, and for both you're seeing only the left half of the needles just because there are more needles involved. The right half of the needles are set up as a mirror image to the left half. Now, I'm going to show you a key to what's going on, and we'll go back and forth between the charts and the description until you can fully understand. A stitches are 3 stockinette stitches at the edge that will roll. That is true if you're making a scarf. They may have stitches to one side or both sides if making a different kind of project. The rolled edge makes part of the scarf edging. Here are the A stitches on the bulky setup, and they are all on the main bed, and they will all knit every row. B stitches are the tucked purls that will set off the cable. These are represented on the bottom row of the chart. That represents the ribber, and they run all the way across at certain intervals. C represents groups of 4 stitches always on the main bed, knitting every row. that will be turned into the small cables. In order to make the tuck lace form correctly, we need to surround it with single stitches on the main bed, and those are the D's. This chart includes one D stitch that is not yet labeled. I just noticed it, and it will be corrected by the time you get to my website to download the free instructions. E is 5 needle spaces, but only one stitch in work, and that one is on the river bed, and it will tuck every other row. F is a group of 6 main bed stitches, which will be cabled. Cables are made every 4 rows, but only 4 of the stitches are crossed on any given cable row. G stitches are set up for true half fisherman's rib. They only occur on the standard gauge setups. They are there to retain the same basic design while giving the fabric the necessary width, in this case for a scarf. After completing whatever hem that we are using, we'll transfer stitches to and fro so that the bulky setup looks like the top picture or the standard setup looks like the bottom picture. And in the tuck lace areas, there are some empty needles. So the transferring is complete here. The fabric is weighted, knit 4 plain rows. The front bed, river bed, is just doing its thing, alternately tucking and knitting. The back bed is knitting every row, and we'll now cross the cables. Outside stitches go to the center first. Those that began towards the center of the work are picked up and moved outwards second. The same is true on the center cable, even though we're working with 6 stitches. This first time we're going to cross only the 4 stitches of those 6 that are on the right hand area of the group of 6. The farthest outward were the 2 on the right, so they go toward the center first, the other 2 go outward. And now we cross the other cable, the one on the far right edge, outward first, going inward, inward going outward. So it keeps things very simple and straightforward. And now we knit 4 more rows. The 4-stitch cables are worked in the same manner every time we work them. Lift them on 2 separate tools, cross those that began on the outer edge towards the center first, then the second pair. All the same needles are now in work. But the center group, now we're going to cross those that began on the left. Last time we did the right 4. Still outside edge towards the center first, but a different group of 4 needles. Right hand small cable, outside to inside, same as every single time we do it, and now knit 4 more rows. And this is the entire pattern. We've switched back to crossing the 4 right hand stitches of the group of 6, and next time we'll do the left hand stitches. But there are no other differences. All the way up the project, we repeat these 8 rows. The single bed version is really very, very much like the double bed version. The difference is that we have to create our tucked purl stitches by hand. Therefore, every few rows, I recommend about every 20. Drop those stitches and latch them up as tucked purls by inserting the tool in the bottom stitch, passing behind one rung of the ladder, grabbing the next one, and pulling through. When setting up, after the hem, empty any needles that are supposed to be empty by moving stitches to the left and the right, but leave the stitch that is supposed to be the tucked purl, creating the tucked lace, so that it knits. That way, when we reach it, we just have to reform it, and here it comes. Of course, every time we need to reform a stitch, we have to ladder it down. Sometimes just tugging on the fabric will get most of the ladder done. Many more times, you will need to manually pull the stitches apart, but I promise you, you can get quite fast at doing it. Not quite as fast as this, I sped up the film, but it's really not as hard of work or as slow as you might think it would be. This is the piece of fabric that I'm working on in the movie. It's showing up finished at right, and you may notice something interesting. The cable looks a little bit different. In fact, both the 6-stitch and the 4-stitch cables look different above and below the dotted line. That is because those below the dotted line were produced and made as true cables, as I'm demonstrating. Those above that point were produced by a faux cabling method, wherein the stitches for the cable exist in the same positions, but we don't cable as we knit. We wait and lace up the cables afterwards. That technique will be covered in a separate video. It is also in the free article on making cables and lace. And all of these patterns will also appear, in addition to the books that they're already in slightly altered versions to fit the magazine format of Country Knitting of Maine News and Views. For the single bed version, the cabling process is identical to the way it is for the double bed version. Cables are crossed every 4 rows. The left cable and the right cable are always made in the same manner. On the center cable, we alternate crossing the right 4 stitches, then 4 rows later, the left 4 stitches. The difference is that at some points we also have to ladder down and latch up our tucked ribs. So for the single bed version, there is no restriction on what kind of machine may be used to work the cables and lace fabric. If it will knit stockinette, you can do the rest. You cross the cables, you ladder down and latch up the tucked ribs. If you have too much trouble crossing the cables, it's one of 2 issues. Your stitch size may be too tight, you do need to keep it a little bit loose for this, or you may have too stiff of a yarn.